Hey, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. Quick reminder that the new book is out. You can change other people. The 4 steps to help your colleagues, employees, even family up their game. This is a business book, but it's also a personal book. I wrote it from my experience as a coach, helping people change entrenched self-sabotaging behaviors. And I put all my knowledge and all of Peter Bregman, my co-author's knowledge, into a book to help you do the same thing with the people that you care about in your life. So it's available right now. It is for sale wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstore.org, your local independent bookshop, my personal preference, if you can do that. And I would love for you to get a copy. That is one amazing way to support me, is to help the sales of the book, and to read it and implement it. And if you like, go on Amazon or somewhere and leave a review. All right, so let's get to today's episode. All right, let's get to today's show. So today's a light, fun, relaxing episode with 2 longtime friends and prior podcast guests, Glen Merzer, who is the author of the new book, Own Your Health, and he's joined by Chef AJ, who provided the recipes, and I would say it's a good thing that they didn't switch roles. And the book is basically, there's nothing new here in terms of science, nothing cutting edge, but it's a really interesting book for 2 reasons. One is it's really funny. So Glenn was a comedian, a TV comedy writer, and he brings all his skills to bear, telling hilarious stories that really point out the ridiculousness of the fact that there is still a pseudo debate about what is the healthiest way to eat. So to give you an example, in the introduction, he says, before you take any of the advice in this book, check with your plumber, pointing out that plumbers and doctors receive roughly the same amount of nutritional education as part of their professional training. So he tells a story about his mother finally firing her doctor because she had to side with her husband because she doesn't want to divorce him because they just got new furniture. And lots of sort of fun, light, interesting, memorable stories that also contain these truths. Because Glenn is very good at seeing the obvious and pointing it out in ways that are easily digestible. So I think maybe even some of your doubting friends might be able to swallow this particular pill. The other thing is that Glenn is really fed up with the fact that there is still a supposed debate about the merits of different ways of eating when whole food plant-based is the only one that's been proven to reverse a whole bunch of diseases. And yes, we can argue about, do you have to be 100% or can it be 80 or 90? But there's no question that the general pattern is not towards keto or paleo or, God forbid, carnivore. So, while the whole food plant-based diet is the diet elect, and everyone's getting ready for the transition, there's still a bunch of hacks, propagandists, blowhards, and ignoramuses who are holding press conferences in the Four Seasons total landscaping parking lot, arguing for other ways of eating. The debate is over. Let's get past it. We know the answer. Let's move on. So I talked to them about the book itself, about what it's like to work together, about how Chef AJ thinks about creating recipes for this book versus that book, and we just have some laughs and tell some stories. So I hope you enjoy these 2 wonderful souls. And without further ado, Glen Merzer and Chef AJ, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you, Howie. Good to be here.
Thank you, Howard. It's one of my very favorite podcasts.
Oh, thanks. Actually, you gotta call me Howie too, because I said Glenn could. So
okay, I can call you Howie. I've moved up in the world that I can call you Howie now.
Well, I figured since you met me through Colin, and Colin's always called me Howie, I thought you were grandmothered in.
All right, I won't call you Dr. Jacobson.
Yeah. Well, that works too. Um, so you guys have a book that just came out,
Yes,
right?
this is it.
Double-fisted, own your health. And so I've talked to each of you on the podcast before separately. Really, how did you guys meet and start collaborating?
How did we meet, AJ?
Glenn, I think we met, again, I'm going to hold it up too. I think we met through a mutual friend, Michelle Wolf, if I'm not mistaken, at a game party. Could that be possible at her house?
No, I think I knew you before that. I think maybe it was at a Veg Source convention.
Could be. Well, what I liked about Glenn though is he's funny. He has a very it kind of reminds me of Bob Newhart, his sense of humor. It's kind of subtle, and in Goldhammer, Dr. Goldhammer is the same thing. Like, you don't always know when they're joking, but I liked his mind, and he's very clever. And we met. I remember when I asked him to help me with my first book. I think that was at a game party, and he was very, very funny playing games. And when I needed help, I asked him, and he's a good collaborator.
Yeah, so, I mean, you both have Hollywood comedic credentials, right? In the business, you both wield those credentials in your lives as vegan, plant-based health advocates as well. Let's talk about that for a minute, because the book is there's nothing groundbreaking. You didn't do any new studies for it.
I did not.
But it's funny as hell, right?
Thank you.
I have some notes in there about your mother basically fired her doctor because she had gotten new furniture, right? And it was cheaper than divorce, right?
She disobeyed the doctor, who had the doctor had said she needed an emergency angioplasty to save her life. And my father was in the room with her, and my father said, "You do that and I'll divorce you. He's just trying to make money," which was not a very politically correct thing to say. So the doctor got furious at my father and said to my mother, "Who are you going to listen to, him or me? He's not a doctor. I'm telling you, you need to do this to save your life." And my father said, "We'll get divorced." And my mother said, "Well, I don't know what to do, but I couldn't afford to get divorced emotionally. We just got new furniture." Yeah. So she passed on the angioplasty. The doctor fired her.
I see.
The doctor took the attitude, "You're not going to do what I say. I don't want to ever see you again." So she got fired by her doctor, and she lived for another 30 years or so without any cardiac event, because I started doing her food shopping.
See, we have all the Esselstyn studies, and we have all this stuff, but it's we love the science, and we love the facts, and we love the data and the evidence, but a story like that can actually be far more powerful in spreading the message, and in doing it in a very lighthearted way with a smile.
Yeah. Well, I think the unfair knock on vegans, and Anthony Bourdain, who I write a little bit about in the book, Anthony Bourdain used to say things like this. He would say, "Vegans are like the Hezbollah, we're militants." Mm-hmm. So this image that our opponents have tried to give us, that we're humorless militants who are moralizing all the time about veganism. Mm-hmm. I have tried never to moralize about it. I have always tried to emphasize the health arguments and the environmental arguments, and to let obviously people make their own decisions. But it all goes down easier with some humor. So that's my approach.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it reminds me of the same knock that feminists get, right?
Right.
It's the same tactic. And I don't know if you guys know Melanie Joy,
right?
And her work on how people seek to sort of unnormalize, and we're some sort of infection in the system, right? Because if we're right, then a lot of things are wrong, and it's almost like the immune system of any system has to try to root out bugs like us that are going to bring it crashing down if it comes along. So, AJ, when you're working on, was this your first book that you turned to Glenn for help with?
No, actually, we wrote in 2010. I wrote a book called Unprocessed, and he fixed it. He unwrote it, I say, because I'm a better talker than a writer. I'm not a writer. It's not something I ever wanted to do, but I talk pretty good and I give a lot of lectures. But if I hadn't gone to Glenn, all my books would probably be 800 pages because I just keep talking. And so what he did, he's much more than an editor. He's a co-writer, but he's very good at taking this and making it this and making it very readable, digestible. And like you say, all the humor in my book, which there was really a funny thing in Unprocessed about kosher salami being blessed but just as deadly. All that came from him. So he really is very good at making things funny.
Well, let me just say though that AJ wrote a good book in Unprocessed, and she wrote a good book in Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss. It's just that in both cases, they were more than one book. And I was like a sculptor trying to hone them down into one book. So, maybe she couldn't have done it without me, but I certainly couldn't have done it without her. They were her ideas and her thoughts.
Right. Oh, I want to say, like, for you, AJ, so having something, sort of edited in a very sort of straight-laced, efficient manner, like lots of people could do that. Why were you drawn to a comedy writer? Like, what did you want, to add it or not lost?
Yeah, well, the thing is I like humor too. And when I teach, I always try to be as funny as possible. And when I'm teaching calorie density, it's not as easy when you're doing scientific things, but definitely when I'm doing cooking presentations, because I find that when there's humor, people pay attention more, because as wonderful as our scientific lectures are, a lot of times they're boring to lay people. And so if you can pepper it, in my case with I do musical parodies, people actually pay attention. And I think they have better retention and learning when things are funny, because you tend to remember that. Think about like your favorite movies. Like I think about like the Pink Panther. There's just certain things I remember, like when he said, "Does your dog bite?" And the guy goes, "No," and the dog bite him. He goes, "I thought you said your dog did not bite." Well, that's not my dog. I saw that probably 40 years ago. I still remember it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah. So it's a way to SOS-free sugarcoat information.
Yeah. He said something once about Colonel Mustard being both a condiment and a game piece, and his mind was very similar to mine. I just thought it would be a good pair, and it was. I mean, this is our third time, and who knows what next to come from the team of Chef AJ and Glen Merzer.
So, what was, Glenn, when you started working on this book, which is a sort of a narrative memoir?
Right.
If I didn't know it was about health, I would say, oh, this is just a funny book about a guy's life and his family and all the meshuggahs and things that go on. What did you feel was missing in the world that this filled?
Good question. I would say that I was trying to do something that isn't out there in the vegan literature. We've all read the vegan literature, and there are great books, by T. Colin Campbell, by Michael Greger, by John McDougall, that make the scientific case. And AJ's books, Unprocessed and Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, begin with her personal stories. And I thought she did a great job on those and with that approach. So I wanted to tell my personal story, but then I also wanted to make a contribution, in a sense, I hope I have, to the literature, in that, not that I've done a new scientific study, of course, but I wanted to make it perfectly clear and make the case that there really isn't a serious scientific debate between those of us who advocate the plant-based diet and those who advocate eating meat. The Atkins diet, the Zone diet, the keto diet, all that nonsense. It's always presented as if nutrition is a contentious field and there's some good arguments on this side and some good arguments on that side. I don't think so. I think it's closer to the global warming debate, where you have 99.99% of scientists saying, yes, there is human-made global warming, and you have 0.01% of kooks saying there isn't. It's the same thing. All the scientific evidence is on the same side. Is there one study out there that chicken is good for your heart? Is there one study out there that roast beef is good for your liver? Is there one study out there that pork is good for anything? No, because they're not good for you. So there's countless studies about the health benefits of fruit, vegetables, fiber. If meat was good for you, wouldn't there be one study somewhere that it's good for you? So how do they make it seem contentious? How do they do that? Well, part of it is that the culture, the media, people in general want it to seem contentious. They want there to be a debate because they're already eating meat and they're already eating dairy. And they want to hear, as I think it's Dr. John McDougall's phrase, they want to hear some good news about their bad habits. But the other part of it is that the weight loss side of it confuses people, because it is possible to lose weight on a ketogenic diet. It is possible to lose weight probably on an ice cream diet. As long as you don't eat too much ice cream, you'll lose weight eating nothing but ice cream. But that's not healthy. You're not going to live long doing that. So it's not only about weight loss, it's about health. And there is no data that any animal foods are anti-carcinogenic. There is no data that any of them have any animal foods increase longevity, increase health, reduce diabetes. There are occasional studies that people lose weight on a ketogenic diet, and there are various reasons for that, but you could lose just as much weight more healthfully if you follow AJ's YouTube videos, and eat the diet that all three of us propose.
Right. Although I want to push back against that a little bit, because there are plenty of books that make that case, but you went about it differently. So I have a couple of notes about phrases that really jumped out at me as being, clever and a little more convincing. Like the disclaimer, consult your plumber before, right? Like you said, you have to consult your doctor before doing any of the things in this book. And then you say, I might as well have written consult your plumber because they know just as much about nutrition. Like that, that's different than, I think you have maybe a little, you're like the vice presidential debate. You get to say, in a normal universe, the vice presidential candidates get to be meaner to each other or more cutting. You get to say things that a lot of doctors maybe don't get to say or think about saying.
Well, look, doctors are going to have in general, and there are some we can think of who have a little more edge than others, but in general, doctors are going to make modest, friendly kinds of, they're going to take a modest, friendly kind of approach, and they're not going to say the other side is full of it. They're going to say, well, examine the evidence. Here's the evidence I'm presenting. I don't think you'll find as persuasive evidence on the other side. And that's the scientific tone, and I wouldn't argue that it should be otherwise. But I'm not one of them. I'm an independent writer, and I can choose my own tone. And I just think the other side has, the side that's advocating meat eating is making a very silly case. Typically they fall into the same trope where they compare their diet, let's say a ketogenic diet, against the standard American diet. So they take people off sugar and off soda and off a lot of things that are in the standard American diet. And then they say, see, we're doing better than those low-fat people. Well, those low-fat people aren't low-fat people. They're not people who are eating a truly low-fat vegan diet, plant-based diet. There are people who are eating the standard American diet, maybe with some added sugar. So they set up a straw man, they defeat the straw man, and then they say, see, the ketogenic diet works. But they never would risk doing a study against people who eat the way we eat, because they'll get creamed, especially in terms of health metrics. Weight loss, maybe for a short period of time, could be equivalent. But over long term, the health benefits of our diet, overwhelm a diet of meat and dairy.
So, Chef AJ, I got a question for you, and I want to frame it in terms of I've always wondered about the process of composing movie music. Like the movie's made, and then someone has to say, okay, now I have to figure out what fits the mood, what songs do I want to add in, what sound effects. And I'm wondering, for you, do you get the manuscript from Glen and then say, okay, here's my latest 75 recipes, let's shove them in? Or do you think about fitting the recipes, creating recipes that reflect or enhance or talk about in some way interact with the book itself? How did you go about thinking about contributing recipes?
Well, it was a little of both, because I had already started writing some new recipes anyway, just because it's something I like to do, is create recipes. But it wasn't that hard, actually, because like Glen said, we eat pretty much the same way. Glen has never had weight problems or suffered with any kind of food addiction, so he can be a little bit more liberal and maybe have, a little salt in food and maybe have a little bread. But for the most part, we eat the same diet. So to create recipes within that framework that he wanted to was just the way I eat. So, it wasn't that hard. But no, it wasn't okay, now I got it. Because if I had to think of 75, I think there were 81. That would have been really hard. There are chefs that can do that. But as luck would have it, I was already starting that process. And the hard part is trying to balance it. In other words, you don't want to, if you have a book, unless it's a dessert book, you don't want to have just all desserts or all sauces. And I tend to kind of go heavy in certain areas of the areas that I prefer to eat, and to try to make it balanced and have some appetizers and some beverages. That for me was the hardest part, because I don't want to say I'm a one-trick pony, but I'm really good at certain categories like sauces, like desserts. And I forget people out there need entrees, even though I'm willing to eat sweet potatoes and broccoli. So that was probably the more challenging part, is to balance the categories.
I would love to see a cookbook from you where there's 100 pages of entrees and every page is the same.
I thought about that. Well, actually, I like eating the same thing over and over. And, Howard, it's very interesting, Howie, that people, when they come to the vegan diet, they think, there's no variety. And I think that if people would really think about their diet before they attempt a plant-based diet, they'd realize the variety, it's not that the variety changes. You know what I'm saying? You basically remove the animal food, but I don't think people eat as much variety as they claim. Have you met the person that eats 30 different breakfasts every month and 30 different lunches?
No, nobody I know who eats a standard American diet touts the variety. They don't go, oh, this is such a varied diet, right? In the same way that people who smoke cigarettes don't say, gosh, I smoke so many different brands, right? That's not the function of an addictive diet. Right?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Right, because you want the predictability of, okay, I feel bad, I'm going to eat a cheeseburger, it's going to raise my mood for about 10 minutes until it starts kicking in, right? Variety only becomes an issue when you're not eating to satisfy other needs.
Yeah. It's just so interesting to me, because I when I think about when I weighed 60, 70 pounds more, I still ate the same thing. It wasn't healthy, but I had a Coke Slurpee every day for breakfast. I didn't have a Dr. Pepper Slurpee one day or a root beer Slurpee. You find the things you like and you repeat them, and it's the same thing with the plant-based diet. And I tend to eat very simply because I think it's cheaper, it takes less time, and I actually enjoy it. When I like something, I want to eat it every day, and that's how I feel about handy yams roasted with broccoli. And but I understand that people want new recipes, and I find that I almost feel like if no more vegan recipes were created from today forward, there'd still be enough already. I mean, Robin Robertson has a book, 1001. How many recipes do we need? But people seem to like that, and I'll keep doing it when I'm inspired. But as somebody that as a food addict in recovery, I don't like the process of testing recipes, because then I got to be testing food over and over when I'm not even hungry. And so I'm glad the book's over. The other problem is Glenn, this book almost never came out, because every day I'd call, wait a minute, I got another one. And there's probably like 5 recipes that didn't make it in the book because they just weren't done in time. So I'll shoot a YouTube video for those.
Oh, how about if I write a haiku and we do 5 recipes?
Well, we could do something.
Really short book.
Because I came up with a creamy Southwestern ranch since the book came out, and I came up with a variation of the lemon poppy seed dressing. So
here's my idea. You send Glenn the recipes, and you write like a 1-page O. Henry short story for each one.
Yeah. Okay.
Features that recipe. I'm so good at giving work to other people.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know the vegan way to call something a red herring, but I feel like when you're talking about variety, I really feel like it's a red herring for people approaching it from a perspective of deprivation. Right? Like, it's like, okay, so now, like, if I'm coming into this thinking I have to suffer now for the animals, for the environment, for my health, I have to give up this stuff for some greater good, then I'm going to think, like, how can I mitigate the suffering? I know I'll eat 30 different meals a week, and maybe that'll make up for it. When in fact, like, yeah, it's fun to cook new things. It's fun to be in the kitchen. But like, God, with the way, the prose you put around it, like there's, in addition to the prose, there's like a spirit of, I'm living my best life here. This is more fun than you know.
Absolutely. And I hope if there are people out there who are still eating meat, I hope that you'll consider just join the team. We're a healthier team to be on. And when I think of all the problems that are caused by the animal-based diet, I mean, it's an endless list. We've got a pandemic now. I can't go to the grocery store without putting my mask on. It's terrible. It's depressing. We can't go to the Broadway theater. When's life going to come back? Well, why do we have a pandemic? Does anyone remember the zucchini pandemic of 1848? No, there was no zucchini pandemic. The pandemics are always caused by chickens, pigs, bats. I think this time they think pangolin. It's always animal-based foods. The viruses come from concentrated populations of animals. So, and I'm reading Dr. Michael Greger's book now about pandemics. There's a chance the next one could be much worse. And it's always coming from animal-based foods. So we have to deal with a pandemic that comes from animals. We have to deal with global warming, the leading cause of which may well be animal agriculture. We have to deal with water pollution that comes from animals. Once in a while, you hear on the news of a problem that's caused by lettuce. What is that? You'll hear once every year or two, oh, romaine lettuce has E. coli. And you think, oh, finally, there's a problem caused by vegetables. Well, no. E. coli comes from the colon of an animal. So when the lettuce is causing problems, it's because there's a cow or a pig farm upstream. So all the problems are caused by animal agriculture. And I tend to think that those ones I could prove. And of course, heart disease and cancer and all our health problems, largely the result of eating animals. So those ones we could prove. Then there are some others that I can't prove, but I just happen to believe. For example, violence. We have a violent world. Has anyone ever walked in a city and said, oh my God, there's a gang of vegans coming. Look, that gang in their faux leather jackets. I tend to think that if people go on a plant-based diet, people would be less violent. I tend to think that if people go on a plant-based diet, there would be less drug addiction. because I don't, as I mentioned in the book, I don't know anyone on a low-fat vegan diet and heroin. Do you, Howie? Have you ever met anyone on a low-fat vegan diet and heroin?
No, but what I have found in the last couple of months, to my great distress, is vegans who are espousing like QAnon theories and have,
Really?
yeah, there's actually a movement in sort of the new age and alternative health and wellness and anti-vaccine. I'm actually starting to wonder, because I used to think if everyone goes vegan, they're basically like freeing themselves from this industrial mindset that's so violent and harmful and exploitative. I'm actually quite concerned about a lot of vegan and plant-based nutcases springing up, and it makes me very sad.
Apparently, it isn't a cure for insanity. So
no,
there's that. But I do think that less people would be would get addicted to drugs if children were taught, eat plants, it's healthy for you. Go on this diet so you don't develop heart disease when you get older. I think less kids would be likely to then start smoking cigarettes and shooting up.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I think, and AJ, your history of food addiction, I think is very informative here. It's that you guys know Adam Sudd.
Mm-hmm.
So he's plant-based addict, and he's been working a lot with plant-based treatment for addictions. He had an Adderall addiction, so he works with addicts. And he put out an Instagram like that I loved. He says, "There's no gateway drugs, there's gateway pain." And so what do we do? Like, we don't give our kids, I mean, we do give them, Ritalin and Adderall and all those things. But just as a society, like when I was sad, what did I get? Chocolate, right? I hurt myself. Someone hurt my feelings. I skinned my knee. I got chocolate. So it wasn't that the food was like the direct gateway to, pot and heroin and all these other things, but that it was a way for me to learn how to self-medicate without actually facing the issue. And I think so, like, if we could get kids to be whole food plant-based and we weren't constantly making them feel better with food, feel better emotionally, then I think there'd be the need to address children's emotional growth in ways that are empowering and fruitful and can be done endogenously without having to reach for something. And AJ, I'm curious about, for your perspective on that as a food addict.
Yeah, well, I think part of it really honestly comes down to calorie density. And all the emotional things notwithstanding, if you think about it, if we lived in a different time in human history or a different part of the world where lots of animal products weren't available 3 times a day and there were no processed foods, like in Uganda, for example, where I actually know somebody who moved here from there. He's 29 years old and he basically eats like me, even though he's not vegan, because they didn't have access to dairy and animal products 3 times a day and they didn't have any processed food. The thing is from the book, The Pleasure Trap, one of the things I've learned is that we are hardwired to seek the most concentrated source of calories in our environment, regardless of any emotional state. That's just human nature. Our ancestors had to do that for survival, but now all the calories are concentrated, right? These aren't little treats anymore. Like when I was little and you got this much Coke at a birthday party, now it's 256 ounces, right? So if you like Coke, 256 ounces are going to bang on your dopamine receptors way more than that little 6 ounces we got in the birthday party. So part of it is just that we all live in a 7-Eleven now. And if our brain has not adapted from the Stone Age to always prefer the most concentrated source of calories, that's what we're going to do. And that's all that's available. And I think when you were saying about how when people say, oh, the vegan diet, there's no variety, I think what people suffer when they go from a highly processed diet with animal products and processed food, which I'm told most Americans eat something like 92% of their calories from, to a whole food diet with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and maybe nuts and seeds, that average calorie density is much lower. And if it's true that the more concentrated the source of calories, the more dopamine is released, which is what makes you feel good. Now the suffering is, I think, with more withdrawal than anything else. You know what I mean? Because they're not they're not artificially stimulating the dopamine in the brain eating so much of these high calorie, high fat foods. But I do think that, nobody addresses the emotional issues in our country very well for any age. So I think it's multifactorial.
Yeah, and I have become, in the last couple of years, I started thinking that the pleasure trap, while it's been very helpful for me, is a little over deterministic around behavior. I've been reading about Rat Park, where they, a lot of the studies on sort of the dopamine and like rats pressing levers to, they will give up their families, they'll stop eating to get the cocaine hit in the pleasure centers of the brain. Those were all done, like we're vegans, we're not really into animal experiments, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason we're not into animal experiments. It's because the animals are treated badly in animal experiments. So there was another animal experiment that was the opposite of animal experiments. It was called Rat Park. And it was the rats were just like basically almost free range. They were sort of observed, but they got food when they wanted. They had playmates, they had toys, they had sex, they had, grooming. And they were given the same opportunity to overdose, and they didn't. Right. So I think you're right. It's multifactorial. There is this sort of caloric imperative, but normal humans override it unless they're in a really fucked up environment. And I think, Glenn, what you're saying is, like, we don't know which came first, but a meat-eating society in which there is this incredible hidden exploitation of billions of creatures, which pollutes our groundwater, which is destroying our climate, right, which leads to incredible social injustice, that it's almost impossible to not feel the need to soothe yourself with dopamine producing crack of one kind or another, that they kind of go together.
I know. I find myself wishing there was a Rat Park in my neighborhood. It sounds great.
Okay, but I'm going to say this. What about a cruise ship? I've been on many of the Holistic Holiday at Sea cruises and other cruises, and people are in a joyous state right then. It's almost like the equivalent of the Rat Park. They can do whatever they want, and they still overfeed.
Yeah, well, because humans are more complicated, and we can bring our trauma with us, right? I can walk around like, what's the character, like who? It's always raining on one person. I don't know if that's like a Peanuts character, but like the rain cloud just follows them around. Like humans can do that, right? So we can get traumatized, and no matter where we are, we're still in a fight or flight or scarcity mindset. I think all of these things can contribute to the argument. Glenn, what was your hope in writing this book? What, in your wildest dreams, what would you like the world to do in response?
I'd say in my wildest dreams, what I would like this book to be known for is to begin to end the debate. The idea that there's a serious debate between eating an animal-based diet and a plant-based diet. The mocking tone that you referenced in the book is because the other side's arguments are so silly. And I mock the other side's arguments in the book. So I would like this book to end the debate, in a sense, and for people to, after reading this book, say, you know what? There are kooks out there who advocate nutty stuff, but it's not serious. The only serious tension there really is between science and culture, not between science and science, because all the science is on our side. The tension is between science and culture, because we live in a culture in which people grill burgers and have hot dogs at the ballpark and have Thanksgiving turkey. And so that's the real tough challenge, to change the culture. Anthony Bourdain used to have his show, what was it called on TV? Parts Unknown, is that what it was called? He would celebrate culture. He would go around the world and eat what people were eating all over the world, and of course it tended to be meat. And I think it's a difficult issue to navigate. How do we celebrate culture? All of us want to, in general, celebrate culture, while at the same time saying, you know what, that part of your culture where you slaughter pigs and eat them, or slaughter cows and turn them into hamburger, that's not a good part of your culture. I mean, we all know that there are cultures that demean women. That's not good. We know that there are cultures with genital mutilation. That's not good. So not everything that falls under the rubric of culture needs to be celebrated. And, you know, we need to celebrate those parts of culture that are healthy and life-affirming, and we need to fight back against those parts of culture that are destroying the earth.
And yet there's also, I think, the gap between culture and science has grown. There's a lot of animosity in it. And I think, in a sense, because science has let us down, right? Like when we look at what science has enabled, right? So, you know, in a sense, science created COVID-19 through airplanes, through the technology of mass slaughterhouses. Science has created global warming, right? All the technologies that have come out of it. I think there's a sense that science is no longer serving human culture. And so it feels like we're biting the hand that has fed us in a very indiscriminate way.
Well, I would say that not that science caused those problems, but economics caused those problems. And science facilitated the economic needs. So there was an economic need to create slaughterhouses, and I guess there were engineers who figured out the most efficient ways to do it. But the science is what's telling us, don't eat those dead animals that are being processed in those slaughterhouses. The science is all telling us the same thing. There is no science that's telling us to eat the dead animals. There's no serious science that says that it's good for our health. But
there's a lot of non-serious science that says that, and and you and I and Chef AJ can look at an article and follow the money trail a little bit, right? So I would agree with you. I think it's sort of a capitalist imperative, but capitalism determines what science gets made. You know, I was part of a team. We were trying to do a very simple, low-tech, randomized controlled trial showing that our program, the WellStart Health program, was better than doing nothing for people with type 2 diabetes. We couldn't get it off the ground. We didn't have the funds to take that thing through with the institutional review board, with all of the forms and the things we have to fill out. Like, science is really expensive.
Yes, it is.
And so if capitalism is fueling science, that means capitalism is putting a lot more money to try to prove that beef is good for you than to prove the opposite.
Which is something I get into in the book. I mean, there's this fellow, Gary Taubes, who did something like $29 million worth of studies to try to prove that fat is good for you, and just wasted $29 million, But none of the studies are really persuasive. They just generate headlines. There was the study called the Red Meat Papers that came to the conclusion that we should all continue our red meat consumption. And they based that not on any new science, but what they said was, yeah, it's true that red meat consumption leads to more cancer and more heart attacks. But on the other hand, and I'm quoting here because I wouldn't want to misquote them, quote, the desirable effects associated with reducing red meat consumption, such as reduced heart disease and cancer, probably do not outweigh the undesirable effects, such as the burden of modifying cultural and personal meal preparation and eating habits. So that was a study. They did a meta-analysis of existing studies. They said, yeah, all the evidence shows that you live longer and you're healthier if you don't eat meat. But on the other hand, it's very difficult It's very difficult. So we're going to recommend continued red meat consumption. That's the kind of nonsensical study that the other side funds.
Right. And when you think about how disrespectful that is to withhold the truth from people because you've decided what's best for them.
Right.
That's
and that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, a scientific review. It's nonsense.
Right. It was published in the Annals of Chutzpah.
Yes.
So AJ, what are you working on these days? Have you for people who are watching on YouTube, you've got this beautiful wallpaper.
Yes,
Chef
thank
AJ,
you.
When you're Chef AJ now, but when you joined, you were like doing summits, like what?
Right,
what are,
yeah,
what
and you
up
were
to?
actually yes. I thank you for asking, and so I do have a YouTube show, and you're scheduled actually in a few months to be a guest, and it's called Chef AJ Live, and because for lack of a better title, I didn't know it was going to be a show, but what happened is the day the pandemic happened, I went live. Thought I was going live to my private group. And I'm not very good with technology. And I pushed a button that it went everywhere on Facebook and YouTube, and people seemed to enjoy it. And they enjoyed the connection, especially when the pandemic first began. And I started asking.
It was good that you were fully dressed.
Actually, just from the waist up. And actually, it's funny you say that because one time I was in a towel, just checking the technology, not knowing I was live. So there is actually a short little YouTube saying why you have to make sure your camera is off if you're going to do this kind of thing. But thankfully, I was clothed. And so I got a little bored just hearing myself talk. And this was like in March of this year. And so I asked friends if they would come on with me, and then it just snowballed. And so I'm booked until March 22nd of next year with guests. And this is doing like 1 to 2 shows a day. But that's not my job. It's my hobby. It's my passion. But I actually do host these summits. And you were an expert last year. Well, actually it aired this year, but we interviewed last year, called the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. And so I'll be doing that again. And we are doing a different one this year, also based on just GI health, because it was interesting, Howard, that when we did the Truth About Weight Loss Summit and we asked people what their obstacles were about going plant-based, they did say recipes, that they wanted more recipes, but they also said there's apparently a lot of people that have GI problems from here all the way down there, that they felt that eating plants either contributed to or made worse. So when people say things like that, I go look for experts, and I found 40 experts to say it's exactly the opposite. It's the plants, specifically the fiber in the plants, that's going to heal your gut. And so, you give me one little kernel, and I'm going to make a summit out of it. Because I just, I'm not a doctor myself, but I love interviewing doctors because they're smart, and especially the plant-based doctors. And I love that way of getting information out to people.
Awesome. And Glenn, what about you? What's your next project?
Oh boy, I don't really know. I'm also a playwright and a screenwriter, so I sometimes have projects on that side of things. But I would like to do another book. One thing I've thought of is that this book is. The theme of it is about how to take your health into your own hands, how to heal yourself rather than always relying on doctors.
Right.
And I've thought of doing another book that could be something like Own Your Health Case Studies, where the stories of 10, 15, 20 individuals who have cured themselves, who have taken their health into their own hands. So that's a possibility. I'm also starting a newsletter. If people go to the title of the book plus the word book, ownyourhealthbook.com is the website of the book. And on that website, you can sign up for my new health newsletter that I'm going to make a quarterly newsletter. And in that newsletter, I will tell some of those stories of people who take their health into their own hands.
And the value prop of that newsletter is, so like you do a lot of research, right? But you then present it in very entertaining and digestible form for people.
Yeah, well, it relates to what you said at the top of the podcast, that when people hear the anecdotes, when they hear about individuals who get well, by some personal protocol, which might simply be the plant-based diet. It might be the plant-based diet and a specific herbal supplement or whatever. I think people want to know about that. You know, in science, anecdotal evidence is not considered, you know, dispositive. They don't make scientific conclusions based on anecdotal evidence, and I think that's as it should be. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that anecdotal evidence is worthless. You know, if you found yourself on an island somewhere getting a terrible rash, and you met the natives and they said, "Oh, here's what you do for that rash. You put on this powder from this plant," and you wouldn't have a scientific study there, but if you were stranded on that island, you might very well try that powder. They're all telling you it works.
Right.
So I believe that anecdotal evidence has value. It's not as determinative as scientific evidence, but it has some value.
Okay. So I got a question I've been thinking about since the last time we talked, which I think was about 4 years ago. It was before the 2016 election, I think. You wrote a book, a novel, about the first vegan president. Did Cory Booker ever get a copy of that?
He did not, to my knowledge, no.
Oh.
I was rooting for him. I thought he was a pretty good candidate. I do remember, though, that in one debate, the word vegan came up, and he said, "Oh, I'm not, you know, that's not important," or something. You know, he naturally had to downplay his own veganism. I still think it speaks highly of him, though.
Right. Yeah, there was another, I can't even remember his name, but there was another guy, most of whose policies I wasn't a fan of, but he was like really sharp on lifestyle medicine issues. I can't remember. It's like a guy from, like a congressman from Ohio, I think.
It wasn't
Indiana.
Dennis Kucinich, was it?
No, him I liked. I could pinch his cheek. No, it was a guy who was, I think he was like military. He was pretty right-wing Democrat. It wasn't my cup of tea, but he was right on the money about, like, we are wasting our money on healthcare, and the whole Obamacare versus not debate is completely the wrong thing, and we should be treating people with lifestyle. And it's like, oh, you won a little piece of my heart.
Can I tell my Dennis Kucinich story?
Oh, sure. So first, tell them who it is for everyone who's listening.
Yeah,
Who's
well, Dennis
underage.
Kucinich was a very, very left-wing congressman from Ohio, I think from the Cleveland area, and a vegan. And he ran for president in, I think it was 2004 in the Democratic primary. And I think most of us knew that he was a long shot. You know, he had some, he was essentially on the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, but without the following that Bernie Sanders has. Mm-hmm. So I met him at an event, and since I knew he was a vegan, and since I was pretty confident he wasn't seriously going to be nominated by the Democratic Party, I said to him, "Why don't you talk about animal agriculture and all the harm it's doing?" And he said to me, "You know, Glenn, I'd like to, but I'm trying to run for president."
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, when you got a 0.1% chance, that's the time to do it.
Well, you know, I mean, I don't want to, this is not a political podcast,
right.
But when we look at over the last 8 years, the people who have sort of unmuzzled themselves to start saying the things that we thought were not acceptable in public policy were the far right, by and large. Mm-hmm. Right. All of a sudden, they're saying things. We say, "Well, you can't say that and have a national following." Well, apparently you can. You know, it feels like those of us who are on the progressive side, who are on the side of science and health, we have been muzzling ourselves for a long time to just be acceptable, to get in to the conversation. And people are looking at us and say, and they're sensing that our lack of integrity, like we're not going all out.
I think that's a great point, Howie. I hope a lot of people are considering that very seriously, because we're running out of time in terms of global warming. The idea that we have two political parties, and I know you say it's not a political podcast, so tell me when I'm going too far, but we have one political party that denies global warming, and we have another one that talks only about carbon dioxide, and they don't talk about methane, which is coming out of both ends of the cow.
Right. Well,
where's the science in that?
My view is, you define denialism not by words but by actions. Both parties are climate denialists, right? If I told you, hey, Glenn, your house is on fire, the room you're in is okay, it's getting warmer, and maybe some plaster's falling from the ceiling, but the rest of your house is on fire, and you go, yes, I believe that. I think we need to do something about that. And you sit and you keep talking to me. I get the feeling that you're denying it just as strongly as the people who are claiming it's not on fire.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you.
Well, on that note, tell us about, so you got the book. Let's talk a little bit about the book to reinforce with the name of the book, where people can get it, the website.
Yeah, the website again is ownyourhealthbook.com. There's also information on Chef AJ's website, which is chefajwebsite.com. And it's available on Amazon.
All right. So chefajwebsite.com. Chef AJ was not available to you?
It is available, and we do own it. It's yes, it originally wasn't available, but very, very soon in the near future, my website will just be my name, chefaj.com.
Okay, good. Because I was like, what asshole is squatting on your name?
I know. Well, it was, believe me, that happened, and it took a while to get my name back. But in the meantime, yes, it'll be very soon. But right now, it's just my name plus the word website.
I'll finish. I'll tell you a very heartwarming story. So, Josh LaJaunie and I wrote a book called Sick to Fit, and we wrote it before we thought about the website presence. So the only thing that was available was Sick #2 Fit, which is not as good, right? As Sick to Fit, it's confusing. Got to say the number 2, and I have to move my hand in a 2 shape, and I couldn't find the person who owned sicktofit.com, except it was a blog that had like 3 entries. The last one was 2009. And, you can go on like different registers and try to find and reach the person. I couldn't do it. And finally I went back and I saw that the person, he had done some sort of like coaching people to reverse diabetes. And I don't know the details of what he was doing, but he had some testimonials on this hidden page way deep in his website, and some of them actually had emails and phone numbers of the people he helped, and all I knew was his first name because the people would say Bob. So I contacted them and they put me in touch with Bob, and Bob is now pretty much like retired up in Portland. He was like an elite runner. He ran a marathon in like 2 hours and 15 minutes in his heyday in the early 70s, mid 70s. And he said, oh, you're doing good work. Let me give you the domain. I was prepared to negotiate. I was ready to pay thousands for it. He said, oh, you're doing good work. Let me give it to you. And it's like we become friendly, and it's like, wow. Like there are, there's good that can happen.
That's a great story.
So, all right, well.
I can't see or hear you. I don't know if it's a problem on my end or if you just haven't enabled your audio yet.
What?
Whoops.
Sorry about that. Just started talking by itself. I apologize.
No worries. I can cut that out. I have editing chops.
Okay.
All right. So Glen Merzer and Chef AJ, the book is Own Your Health. The website is ownyourhealthbook.com or amazon.com. chefajwebsite.com, soon to be just Chef AJ. And awesome. You guys have other publicity? Yes, you can't go and do talks anywhere. Or do you have what's your COVID PR strategy?
Podcasts.
Yep. Yeah. And just YouTube.
YouTube. Yeah.
All right. Well, I look forward to the day when we can hang out in person.
Yeah, well, if people would stop eating dead animals, that would be easier.
Yeah. All right, let's end it on that note. Glenn and AJ, thank you so much for all you do. Thanks for your work on this wonderful book, and thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Howie.
Howie. So long, AJ.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you go out and get the book, Own Your Health by Glen Merzer, with recipes by Chef AJ. And let's see what's going on. So we got some running news, which is on Saturday. Somehow I injured my knee. I dove 3 times in the Frisbee scrimmage and caught the disc exactly none of them. So my record is unblemished, although my legs are. And the next morning, or even that afternoon, actually, I was starting to feel kind of bad in the right knee, and I think it might be subpatellar bursitis. So I've did 6 miles of walking today, and icing, and hopefully it'll be back in time for me to re-injure it again next Saturday. In garden news, I finally cleaned up. I was harvesting the sweet potatoes, and I pulled out the potatoes and left the vines in a giant mess that sort of got rained on and started rotting. So I got those all out. We mowed a little bit behind the bees. I am still too chicken to mow in front of the bees. I'm hoping, it'll be one really cold day and they'll all just want to stay inside their hives and not worry about the 2-stroke engine just inches away from the entrance to the hive. The other thing I'm doing for the garden for the bees is creating, I think they're called candy boxes. And so I almost bought a table saw, which I kind of really want. Although all these videos on YouTube talk about how dangerous it is. But if I could get that table saw, I could rip wood into 1 3/8 inch height and miter it and nail it or staple it together, and basically taking sugar and water, hardening it in this frame with kind of a metal hardware cloth on the bottom, and then you just put that on top of the beehive just under the roof, and the bees can live on that all winter. And we don't take a lot of honey from our bees, if any. This year I don't think we took a single bit. We're just trying to keep them alive so that they will pollinate our area. They don't really go for our garden. They kind of go up and out, but I'm hoping somebody else has bees that are pollinating us, and one beehive washes the other. Other things we're doing in the garden, we got a whole bunch of beans. They finally dried on the vine, and it's really beautiful to see. It's not that much, like you see how challenging it is for human beings to get the calories they need from agriculture. Like the whole thing might have been a mistake. Maybe we were just, focused on gathering and not trying to grow things and spending all our time keeping weeds away and keeping the soil properties perfect. And the other thing is I have begun again growing broccoli sprouts, trying 2 different kinds while I do research to see if there's a difference between sprouts and microgreens. The sprouts you just put in water and in a mason jar with a screen on top and let them drain and rinse them twice a day. And the microgreens you actually put into a growth medium of compost and potting soil or something equivalent, and you actually grow them from seed into little plants, and then you cut them off so that you're not eating the soil as well. So doing both of those, trying to get some more of that wonderful sulforaphane into our veins. And aside from that, it looks like the garden is coming to a close. The kale and lettuces that we planted in the fall did not do well, so there's not that much to speak of. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatterley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bennett, Gila Cert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.